And greetings. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace with Todd Erzin, Aaron McIntyre, and all of you. And we are brought to you by our friends over at First Cup Coffee Company with a flavor for every freedom-loving American. You can try them today and get a discount when you go to firstcup.com. Use the promo code DACE. They put the roast on date right there on every bag, so you can see it is shipped to you within days of being roasted, because freshness is one of the things they emphasize over there. And they also emphasize the same values that you do. So you don't just get phenomenal coffee, but you get to support the same values that you believe in as well. Firstcup.com is where you want to go. Use the promo code DACE to get a discount when you go there. Firstcup.com and use the promo code DACE. All right, coming up on today's show at the bottom of the hour, return of Davis Younts. He is a veteran and an attorney. We first met him during the purge that went on a few years ago in the military over the toxic genetic serums. Well, under the new administration, under President Trump's directive, and now with Pete Hegseth fully in charge at DOD, there are promises of restoring those who lost their military careers for refusing to be poisoned, potentially. How are we doing in terms of restoring that personnel? Is the military bureaucracy and apparatus following through on the overall vision from the civilian command? So I've gotten several notes about this, both positive and negative, in our audience about where things stand, where this issue is concerned. I want to get some clarification from someone that has been on the front lines of it now for several years, and we're going to get that coming up at the bottom of the hour. Next hour, for idolatry or not, I continue to be singularly concerned about a growing, shall we call it, phenomenon in our culture. And there are some recent developments that continue to confirm my suspicions. And I want to alert you to this, but I also want to let the audience in, guys, on a conversation that we had amongst the three of us last week regarding this subject, all right? And what is the line between warning people and introducing people at the exact same time?
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, I certainly don't want to introduce people to things. On the other hand, I got to think, if you're listening to this show, you're pretty discerning, right? I mean, if you're not a discerning person or interested in becoming one, I would imagine you probably don't hang out here on a very frequent basis, probably, right? I mean, if you're just someone that can just easily just be grabbed by the back of the head and led into a trough, mouth agape first and told to breathe, okay, in between gobbles, chances are we're probably not your show, but that doesn't mean, on the other hand, that we can't, this is one of my 10 commandments of political warfare. What is the commiserate amount of exposure to give your enemy before you're letting them use you, okay? And I think, given the continued prevalence of this topic, and almost every day now, there seems to be a new front where this, shall we call it, phenomenon is concerned. I do think maybe we should have this conversation, let the audience listen in on it. So we'll do it next hour. And then, speaking of my idolatries, for Pop Culture Tuesday, I did get out and see the new Captain America film, and I have some thoughts. And I have some thoughts about the film's worldview. Although, given some of the comments made by the film's main star leading up to the film's release and the studio that produced said film, it may not necessarily be the worldview comments you are anticipating. All right? So we will get into that and more coming up in the next hour of the show as well. But let's lead this thing off, as we always do, with Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by a miracle in Toronto. Yesterday afternoon, a Delta Airlines flight from Minneapolis carrying 80 people crash-landed at Toronto Pearson International Airport in Ontario. Shocking footage soon emerged of the overturned fuselage, with both wings ripped off laying on the runway. Miraculously, no one died. 18 passengers were taken to the hospital. This morning, a clearer picture emerged of what happened. The plane in question, a Bombardier CRJ-900, appears to have made its final descent so quickly the landing gear were crushed, causing the plane to overturn. Canada's Transportation Safety Board, along with the FAA, are investigating. Moving on, Democrat Congressman Eugene Vindman went on CNN and says DOGE
is causing a reign of terror, chaos across the federal government.
What exactly will you be cutting? And how much of it? And can I watch you do it while eating pork cracklings?
Meanwhile, at the Social Security Administration, the acting head of that department has resigned abruptly. Michelle King, a career federal worker who had been with the Social Security Administration since 1994, took her ball and went home after a disagreement with the Department of Government Efficiency.
Stop, don't come back.
In recent days, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hosted a webinar advising illegal aliens on how to avoid detention and deportation by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's prompted Border Czar Tom Homan to refer her to the DOJ. Last night, Tom Homan added,
"Look, she's the dumbest congresswoman ever elected to Congress, and she proves that every day. And look, bottom line is, I can't believe any member of Congress, Republican, Democrat, Independent, would want to educate criminal illegal aliens who are in the country illegally, been convicted of a violent crime, and have been ordered removed by an immigration judge after due process at great taxpayer expense. You got a congressman or congresswoman that does not want ICE to do the job that Congress has mandated them to do and funds them to do."
Dr. Debbie Birx, scarf and all, crawled back out of her spider hole once more to retcon messaging on the COVID jab.
We didn't explain that COVID vaccines were nothing like the childhood vaccines. That is not what the COVID vaccine was designed to do. It wasn't designed to prevent against infection. And if you look at the vaccine hesitancy rates, they've doubled since COVID. So we have to start addressing these things. The messenger RNA vaccine should have been rolled out for the people that were at risk for severe disease, because that's what the vaccine was developed for.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has followed through on his promise to appoint his now former chief of staff as Attorney General of the Sunshine State. DeSantis describes James Uthmeyer as a bulldog and promises stellar results after former Attorney General Ashley Moody went to D.C. to serve in Marco Rubio's vacant Senate seat. One quick note on yesterday's montage, that clip of Al Sharpton saying he can't imagine some of the founding fathers trying to overthrow the government. That clip was not from recent days. I'd never seen it before, but it is still timelessly retarded. And finally, Senator John Kennedy has some words of wisdom for the Democrat Party.
You just got to try harder not to suck.
And that's what happened while we were away.
Aaron's montage brought to you by our friends. I wish that guy's voting record was half of what his quip capability is.
We were just
you'd have a hell of a senator there, Louisiana, a hell of a senator there, but you don't. So you'd have a quipster. But that was a good one, though, I must admit.
Yes, it was.
Aaron's montage brought to you by our friends over at Constitution Wealth. Attention investors, good news. We believe that we've turned the tide in the battle for the soul of America. Donald Trump's been elected and is beginning the Herculean task of pushing back against the forces of wokeism in America. Many businesses are beginning to mothball their DEI, CRT, and ESG programs and focus on serving customers, all customers, rather than just political interests. So what about you? Have you joined the movement of Americans who are using their investments to hold companies accountable for their ethical behavior? If you'd like to join other patriotic citizens by aligning your investments with your conservative values, go to constitutionwealth.com/blaze for a free consultation. Constitution Wealth is a registered investment advisor. You should review Constitution Wealth's disclosures at constitutionwealth.com to understand their services and fees. All investing involves risk, including the risk of loss, and this is a paid endorsement, and I am not a client of the firm. Again, constitutionwealth.com/blaze is where you want to go. And we will go now to Aaron's montage. And let's start with Debbie Birx, because this is not isolated now. It's a campaign. I don't know if you guys saw this. I just saw this pop up in my feed, Aaron, right as you were playing the Debbie Birx clip. And I just tweeted it out in real time as we were all watching this together. So Paul Offit is a name in your community I would imagine you guys know pretty well, Todd, right?
Yeah, he thinks people like me are evil.
Yes. I mean, Paul Offit is...
Moffat.
It is Offit.
Offit, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Paul Offit is He's a pimptress. Okay. He is, this is a religion to him. And science is magic, and he believes in a vaccine intifada. Okay, if you do not partake of the magic potions, if you do not take part in the rituals that Mr. Offit does, then he wants you offed it. Okay, and off it, as in off of polite society. Okay. Leading vaccinologist Paul Offit says Fauci agreed that only high-risk groups should get the COVID-19 vaccine. Let me repeat that. Didn't you just hear this? Offit says Fauci agreed that only high-risk groups should get the COVID vaccine. Offit agreed that only high-risk groups should get the COVID-19 vaccine. Offit agreed that only high-risk groups should get the COVID-19 vaccine. What did Debbie Birx just say in your clip? Exactly that. That's exactly what she said. That is exactly what she said. That is exactly what she said. If you think it's a coincidence that in two completely different forums, Debbie Birx and Paul Offit came out with the exact same messaging, then you probably do believe this show is a danger to our democracy. And say that at the exact same time, all of your local news channels say it as well. This is a retcon that is happening right now. And she's not an isolated incident. Now, Mr. Offit takes it to the next level. Let me finish his comments. Fauci agreed that only high-risk groups should get the COVID-19 vaccine, but overruled the scientists and recommended vaccination, universal vaccination, because he believed that Americans couldn't handle the scientific nuance. This is the next step of the retcon. All right, so Birx, of course, that scarf around her, the perpetual bedazzled scarf around her neck is so tight, not all the oxygen is always going to her brain. So she's usually a day or so behind the Nancy Pelosi of Anthony Fauci's. Paul Offit, though, he's on it. This is the next stage. This is where this is going. You are watching in real time a retcon. Hey, he's got his preemptive pardon. It's clear they're coming after him. The states are suing that guy. And the timing of this is not coincidental either. Why are we having these conversations all of a sudden? Did an event just occur? Was there some MacGuffin to the plot that was just engaged in the script that would cause people's lines of dialogue to alter and change suddenly heretofore? By golly, there was. In fact, I believe we just had this discussion with a certain woman named Mary yesterday on the program from a group called what now? What was the name of her organization? The Children's, what is it, Todd?
Defense.
Yes, Children's Health Defense. And the founder of the organization that Mary Holland is overseeing, the founder of said organization is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And he now has which position? Secretary of HHS, the most powerful healthcare policy position in the United States government. And you could argue only the leader of the WHO globally has a position that comes even close to rivaling that. There's no coincidences with these people. None. Only calculations. No coincidences, only calculations. You're watching a massive retcon take place in real time. Who was it that said, you know, when we do a traditional vaccine rollout throughout history, what we've done is we've never done like universal vaccinations. We first wanted to know who had antibodies that showed that they had already been infected and overcame it. And we isolated the high-risk groups first in order to get to herd immunity as fast as we could. Who said this? Oh, I know. Me! I said this for weeks and months on this show at the time, in fact. I did. The guy who couldn't get out of community college, but apparently is one of the last few people around here that still believes in actual science. Where were the seroprevalence studies? Why were we just giving these to absolutely everybody? It didn't make any sense. Why did we deny natural immunity? I even theorized at the time the best answer as to why this is happening is they don't want to admit they created this virus. It's a Frankenstein. It's a chimeric they created in a lab. And so therefore they have no idea how much their own concoction actually abides by the natural laws of science and immunology. And they are tacitly admitting this to us. That's the best case scenario. The best case scenario is they fashioned the murder weapon and fired it at us. And now they're retroactively trying to give us experimental Kevlar. Now, that's not much of a best case scenario, is it? No. But so if that's the best case scenario, what can you imagine all the other scenarios might be?
I know all of them.
Then the floor is yours.
I'm sure they're going to, as they clear the air, Steve, I'm sure they're also going to return all the money they made off of this, right?
Of course.
See, because the real
and
science...
I'm sure, in fact, they'll even donate it to all the federal workers that Doge has displaced. Yes.
Here's the thing. Remember, the real science of this is the bank. You can't have, by law, a vaccine mandated if it doesn't apply to the entire population. That's why they couldn't stop at just those, Steve, as you read right out of the gate from Offit, agreeing with Fauci, only those most at risk.
Yep.
You can't mandate that. All right? The real science of all this, the magical power of vaccines, just like I've told you all along.
That's what you're watching here. Now, these people are trying to get ahead of this. Now, I don't know if Offit is off script or not. Clearly, the script between him and Birx is unanimous in terms of, well, originally they were supposed to just go to the high-risk people. Okay. Now, Offit went a step further by saying to Fauci, "Thou art the man. There he is. Get him." All right. Who knows if that will be carried forth, that banner as well. But at the very least, they're threatened. At the very least, they are concerned what's going to come out here. And these are attempts. Think Piers Morgan just found out 3 days ago from a cancer expert buddy of his that there's been a massive surge of turbo cancers, particularly in Aaron's generation. You know, like young people that would have worked like major corporations, like in Silicon Valley, that all would have had to take, or creative spheres, where they all would have had to take that jab to go and work. And, just coincidentally.
Sure.
Okay. Think Piers Morgan just found this out 3 days ago, and lo and behold, here's Debbie Birx on a panel. Think so? Because I kind of don't think that he did find this just out 3 days ago. I'm kind of thinking he didn't.
No.
Yeah, I don't think any of this is, again, there are no coincidences, only calculations with these people. No coincidences, only calculations. All right. They are attempting to get out ahead of this right now. And in many respects, what you're witnessing with these, with the Offit and with Birx, for the first time really now. And we are almost exactly 5 years since this all began. For the first time in these last 5 years, you're starting to see fear/self-awareness. And just as we've been saying with the Doge stuff, hey, the people that are trying to stop the fraud are the ones that are the fraudsters, right? The people who are now trying to get out in front of a story that hasn't even really begun to be told are the ones that wrote the script. They're the villains. They're the baddies. What I will be fascinated with moving forward is Offit's pointing his finger at Fauci for this. And seeing if that becomes, hey, we got to give him somebody. This guy's made more money than the rest of us. He's 80 years old. He got his preemptive pardon. The rest of us didn't. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we got to give him someone. That guy made more money off of this than all the rest of us did. We're not going to prison for him. We're not getting discredited for him. We're not being disgraced for him.
Well, for that to do what we would like it to do, it's going to have to break through what, even though Piers Morgan is talking about this while at the same time in this very conversation, and what many people, including many Republicans, still think to this day. Piers was saying, yes, even though this is going on, I still believe that the vaccine saved millions of people.
Yes.
See, that's what we have to break through.
I agree. I mean, it's the study we cited last week, which admitted that the more you know what? Essentially, the study from the University of Washington summarized Daniel Horowitz's line. The more you inject, the more you infect. That's essentially what it said. Mm-hmm. And then what's its conclusion after the data shows this? We need to do this even better than we did it the last time. No self-awareness whatsoever. This is the first amount of self-awareness we've seen in 5 years.
Because it was a cult.
Yeah, I mean, these people have demonstrated no humility on any front at all for 5 years. And so it is no coincidence that as the foundation has been laid of a new public health department, and we haven't even gotten to Jay Bhattacharya taking over NIH, which gives out more grants than almost any bureaucracy in the United States does. That's Francis Collins' old position. All right, we haven't even gotten to some of the other people yet that are still to be confirmed. But this is the first amount of self-awareness they've shown in 5 years. Why? Why now? Why now? It's because RFK Jr. has been confirmed. That's why. That's why. And what will be fascinating moving forward now is if you turn does the script have a second page? Because did Paul Offit just go off script? Or did he go ahead and turn the second page of the script and say, that's who you're looking for right there, that guy right there. You guys already hate him anyway. Nobody knows who the hell I am. Everybody hates this guy. Go after him. He's the one that made all kinds of money. That'll be fascinating to see. And this is what happens, by the way. We say on our show, the truth is its own reward. Let the truth have its way. Just let it have its day. Let it out. And, this has been quoted and attributed to everybody from Spurgeon to Augustine. I'd no more defend the word of God than I would a caged lion. Simply let the lion out of its cage. It'll defend itself just fine. The truth, when let out, isolates things. It clarifies things, which is why we often don't want it out. In our sinful states, we don't want things clarified and isolated. We want them murky. We want to look at another human being and judge our righteousness by them so that we can say, well, at least that was half the craze of why people love shows like Jerry Springer and Sally Jesse Raphael and all that stuff when we were growing up. Because you're like, dude, I know I'm cheating on my wife and slapping my kids around, but this dude's trying to marry his horse, so I know I'm not as bad as him. That's what it was. Self-righteous, moral, subjective absolution, essentially. Somebody's always worse than me, which means I'm pretty good. And then the truth comes out and says, there aren't any good. Why do you call me good when no one is good but God? All of you need to repent. King, slave alike. All are bound for and deserving of hell. And we thought, thank you for and we responded with, thank you for the clarification. We really needed to know that. No, we tortured that dude to death. And then right before he could breathe his last, we went ahead and hung him up on a cross so that he would, die naked and disfigured in front of masses of people in broad daylight. We did that to him instead. We don't want the truth. We don't want it. Not in our flesh anyway, we don't. In our natural state, we don't want it. We want the outcome that we prefer and the narrative that we desire to be told to us as the truth, whether it's true or not. And what you're seeing right now on multiple fronts, what Tom Homan is doing, again, going right at AOC, going right at the Pope. How many of you even knew that what Tom Homan is advocating is the exact same immigration policy that has existed at Vatican City for, as far as I know, forever? What in the world is the Pope even kvetching about? You just can't walk into Vatican City, claim refugee status, and say, I'm a citizen here now. You can just walk into Vatican City, drop a kid, and say, hey, kumbaya, we're now Vatican Cityites. You can't do that.
Unless you know the Pachamama secret handshake, then apparently, yes.
But see, this is where it takes courage of conviction. Courage of conviction is often what is needed to bring forth this level of clarity and truth. And that's something that has been sorely lacking, particularly among the men in our era. What you see out of Tom Homan is some courage of conviction. Because and here's the thing too, when you achieve courage of conviction, That's when you find out that the enemy is an emperor with no clothes. There is no there. That's why the enemy has to operate on accusations. You're a racist. You're a misogynist. You're a xenophobe. You're a homophobe. No one thinks like you. You don't want to be. You don't want to be seen as weird. You don't want to be out of the mainstream. You don't want to be canceled. You don't want to be shunned. Accusations and shame. Accusations and shame. Accusations and shame. That's the enemy's native tongue when he's not lying. And when you don't care anymore, and you come to the point of, I just realized, weird, I guess I don't really need the approval and affirmation of people who are going to hate me no matter what I do, who I could never compromise enough for. And there's no amount of penis tucks I could do of my own my own worldview that would be good enough for them. I mean, I would it's literally convert to what they think, or I'm not worthy of living on this earth. So then why do I give a rip what people who hate me no matter what think about me? Why am I afraid of them? Why do I need their approval? That's when you achieve that courage of conviction. And when you do, boy, that's where there is real power. Today is the anniversary of the release of No Jacket Required, Phil Collins' greatest album. 40 years ago today, the album that gave us the all-time 80s classics, Studio Todd, was released 40 years ago today.
Huge Phil Collins fan. Saw him in concert with Genesis, yeah.
But one of his earlier albums, one of his very first solo hits, I Don't Care Anymore. Now that's a dude breakup song, right? Chick breakup songs, people are crying. The dude just gets increasingly more pissed off, and the drumming gets increasingly angrier as the song goes on. That's a breakup song for dudes, okay? You have to get to the point when you don't care anymore, as Phil sang. And when you do, they get exposed. And that's what you're watching right now. They're getting exposed comprehensively. It's happening with the Social Security Administration and Doge and USAID. It's happening with Tom Homan and the Vatican and everything. When you realize, why do I care one iota what people who hate my guts think about me? Why do I care? The thing is, that sounds easier than it is actually achievable, because we're human beings. But you have to come to grips, and we don't want to become, we don't want to be the people that the world writes, hey, the jerkster called and they're all out of you, right? That's not loving your neighbor as you love yourself either, okay? But you have to come to the point, oh, you're just going to hate me no matter what. Oh, there's no way I could say this. Oh, there's no way I could do this. Oh, there's no amount of compromise I could offer you. See what I'm saying? So it's a zero sum. And that's now when you're liberated. Okay. I guess when or else it is then. I owe you nothing. So, okay, I'm freed up then. Let's let it rip. Or as Mel Gibson says to Joaquin Phoenix in Signs, swing away. We need to swing away more often. Swing away more often in our personal lives, in our communities. That's one of our theme. Our theme this year is lead. You're seeing leadership on a national level on several fronts since this last election, and it is pulling their knickers down. And you're seeing there's no self-awareness there. There's going to be no repentance there. There's going to be no triangulation there. They're too bought in now. We should be doing the exact same thing in our homes, in our cities, our states, and our communities. No, and no, and no. No, we're not doing this anymore. No, we're not. No, I don't care what you think about me. I once did, but I don't care anymore. Whoa, I don't care. Because really, it's just my own death or the death of my worldview are the only things that will satisfy you. So be it then. I owe you nothing. And that's where true courage of conviction is achieved. And that's when the enemy goes on real defense then. And he's back on his heels then. More in a moment. All right, back here on the Steve Deace Show, brought to you by our friends over at Relief Factor. You know, it's really not quantity of life as much as it is quality of life, right? And so many of us are dealing with and struggling with chronic pain, and then after a while, you just start coming to the conclusion it is what it is. It might be. I mean, we get older. You know, our joints don't de-age as we do, you know, and these bodies are finite, mortal shells. And yeah, if you check the death rate again in the world today, it remains a vigorous 100%. Okay. But it's also possible that you're giving up on the fight against chronic pain too early because you haven't tried Relief Factor. Now, we're not claiming this is a magic potion or a panacea. It's a supplement created by physicians who can prescribe drugs, but they realized, you know, drugs just mask the pain and can at times come with other side effects. What if we instead, they said, came up with a supplement that could go after the inflammation in your joints that's likely the reason you're experiencing that chronic pain that symptomizes, manifests as lingering and achiness and stiffness and soreness, right? Well, that something is Relief Factor. Now, again, no guarantees, but over the years, over 1 million people have tried the 3-week quick start, and 70% saw such good results in 3 weeks or less that they stuck with the product long term. So what do you got to lose? Why don't you see if you don't see a difference in your pain in 3 weeks or less, especially when it's only going to cost you $20 to find out? All right, $20 to take that shot. All right, ReliefFactor.com is where you can go. Get the 3-week quick start there today at ReliefFactor.com. ReliefFactor.com, or you can call them at 800-4-RELIEF, 800-4-RELIEF. Well, we were introduced to R. Davis Younts a few years ago because of the yeoman's work he was doing on behalf of military personnel caught up in the purge, when essentially, my belief, the military was using the toxic experimental genetic serums as a means by which to test the total compliance of officers. How far would they be willing to go in a woke military? And if you dared to ask questions and demand that the Uniform Code of Military Justice was actually upheld as written, that was and especially if you did so while invoking a faith in God, then that was a clear sign you probably wouldn't fire on your countrymen if ordered, so you've got to go. At least that's my own opinion. All right. And a lot of people did choose their agency and honor instead of being poisoned, potentially. And the Trump administration has come in guns blazing, promising those people restoration. Pete Hegseth is now fully in charge over at DOD. However, I have received mixed messages in my inbox from military veterans, both pleased and not pleased with what they're seeing on the restoration front thus far. And as we saw the first time Trump was president, it wasn't always that he could get the generals to implement what he wanted as the civilian commander. So as a guy who's been on the front lines of this, I want to get some clarification. Davis, it's good to see you again, brother. And that beard is looking even more epic than the last time I saw you, my friend. Well done. How are you?
I'm doing well. Always an honor. Just thank you for your continued efforts on this. So many of us are grateful that you will not back down on these issues and keep this discussion at the forefront.
Amen. Absolutely. You're very welcome. And the men and women caught in this are worthy of it. And thank you as well that you continue to work on their behalf. Just, you know, I kind of told a little bit about you, Davis, but just kind of reset for audience again, you know, your history and then why you took on this fight.
Absolutely. So I was in law school when 9/11 happened. So I raised my hand. I joined the United States Air Force, served for 11 years on active duty, left active duty, joined the reserve component. And this fight against the COVID mandate was very personal to me. The Air Force tried to separate me at 19 and a half years. So 6 months shy of a retirement. It took an injunction in federal court that saved me from about 24 hours from losing everything my family and I had worked for over that 20-year period. So this was a fight that the Air Force, I didn't look for it. The Air Force brought it to me, and then I became involved with a group of Navy SEALs and others, and we pushed back against this from the very beginning. And finally, we have an administration that's starting to recognize the concerns we raised when the mandate came down.
Okay. And you have been fighting this out in courts, both civil and military, correct, over the last few years on behalf of servicemen and women?
That's right. And there were two issues that we raised throughout this process that I think are critical to understand because they're finally coming to fruition. The first issue was this was an experimental medical product. It was an emergency use EUA product that was not authorized. You cannot legally mandate it on military members when it's an experimental or EUA product.
Can we pause it right there? Because I think this is an important distinction you're making. I want to highlight for the audience because it is true, military members, they even to the point of giving up your own life, when you enlist, you are saying, I am sacrificing a level of my agency and autonomy for the greater collective, the greater good here of being a member of the armed forces. That's inherent to that, right? Now, it's not unilateral, though. It doesn't mean you don't retain any agency or autonomy, but you do sign over a portion of it. And something that is officially FDA recognized or approved is kind of that dividing line on whether you're the first people we're going to test this on or not. And in the case of the COVID vaccines, the only strain of the COVID vaccines that the FDA formally approved, and everybody saw those headlines, FDA approval, was a strain of it that was actually, and I'm calling it a strain because it's the COVID virus in my opinion, so that's what I'm calling it that for. The only strain of it that FDA approved in our country was a variation that was never for sale or available to the civilian population of this country one time. And so the debate in your neck of the woods is, does that line up? If it was never, if the FDA quote unquote approved it, but it was never actually available here on U.S. soil, does that actually meet the threshold of what the CMJ says you can do to me as part of giving up some of my agency as a soldier? Do I have that correct?
That's right. Title 10 of the United States Code was passed by Congress to prevent medical experimentation on military members because there's a history of that in our country. And this was finally done in the 90s. It was very clear federal law. But for the first time, so leading up to this executive order, for the first time, a federal court, the Court of Federal Claims, officially ruled that the medical interchangeability, the bait and switch that Lloyd Austin and the Department of Defense tried to pull on military members was not valid. And that court has ruled that we were correct, that it was an unlawful mandate as it pertains to an experimental virus. That same court, and this is where we get into where we're at now, that same court recognized that at least as far as the Coast Guard, and they're going to be ruling for the other branches of the service shortly, but that they did also violate the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which does apply to military members and says military members are allowed to apply and should receive a religious accommodation to vaccine requirements as appropriate. So that's where we're at legally, just leading up to this executive order. We finally have a court. It hasn't been with a lot of fanfare. A lot of people haven't been talking about it because it's a court of limited jurisdiction, but a federal court has ruled that the mandate was unlawful and that the Coast Guard violated the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
All right. So that sets the scene here now for the re-election of Donald Trump. And he comes out guns blazing with an onslaught of executive orders, Davis, that I have described as a political version of a large amphibious assault. I mean, he is hitting them on virtually every issue front: cultural, social, political, defense, spending, every front. I mean, he's launched an attack against the left, and on your front in particular, he signed an executive order for some form of restoration of those who lost their standing over the COVID, not a vaccine. Can you tell us exactly what that executive order said?
Right. So that executive order applied to two categories. There's really three categories of military members impacted by the mandate and still dealing with the adverse consequences of it. The executive order addresses two categories. It addresses about 8,600 military members that were involuntarily separated solely because they did not receive the vaccine. That was a number that was kicked out very early on. They were primarily low-ranking enlisted folks who didn't have a choice, didn't have an opportunity, didn't have resources to push back in the courts. And frankly, we couldn't react fast enough to save. So that's 8,600. Those people have been given a clear process to apply for reinstatement. And the executive order directs that they will be able to apply for restoration of time in service. So they'll get, even this missed time, they'll get credit as service time for this period. They will be eligible for back pay and potentially for promotion. So there is an effort, and the clear goal of this policy is to try to make those folks whole as if they had continued in service. That's the first category.
So I have heard from several different people in my audience that are in that group, but I've heard mixed results so far. And I don't even want to begin to describe the positive and the negative because you're the expert here. That's why we brought you on. Okay. So let me just ask this in a general way. Is there a reason in the way the order is either written or it is being carried forth? Like we saw, for example, in his first term, Trump tried to kick all the trainees out of the military and the generals just literally just belayed that order and refused to obey it. Okay. Now, a lot of those generals from the highest rankings are gone, but you still have an entire swampy DOD apparatus there. So is it the order's ambiguity or is it the way that the order is being enforced and carried forth that is causing such mixed reaction amongst some of the military personnel in my audience that are in that group you just described?
I think there's two pieces of it. One is a concern that it will not be carried out properly because it is pushing people into the Board of Corrections for Military Records process, which is a broken process that is highly bureaucratic. So there is a pathway to do this that is I think, going to quickly reveal that pathway is broken and that it's primarily managed by bureaucratic functionaries that are horribly inefficient. So my hope is this will quickly reveal, because there is a monitoring process. These folks are going to have to report to Secretary Hegseth on a 30-day basis. And if the system is not doing what it's supposed to, he's going to have transparency and I hope be able to make some very clear changes. I think that's one level of disappointment is people don't trust the system. The other is the question of accountability. I think there's a lot of us that wish that this executive order had come out the gate and looked to hold accountable and responsible individuals like Lloyd Austin, who pulled a bait and switch on military members.
And if the latter had happened, that would have maybe clarified some of the things in the former, right? Because the agency that you're in, the bureaucracy that you guys are leery of, would be put on blast. Right? I mean, there would already be something pointing out there, hey, we're going to hold people accountable. So if you try to gum this up, you try to slow this down or make people, dance with ants in their pants and say that we're sorry 7,000 times before you carry this out, we're watching you, basically.
That's right. And that's what I'm encouraged by when we look at the language, because there is some very helpful language in the guidance that's been pushed out. They haven't called it unlawful, but they have called it unfair and they have called it unjust. And from the perspective of the Board of Corrections, that's the legal standard at the Board of Corrections. So baked into the policy is a solution through the Board of Corrections. The problem is I practice with I have a lot of cases before the Board of Corrections in all branches of the service right now. And the normal process takes over 2 years to get a resolution. That's not going to work here. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think we're going to see an opportunity for systemic reform. And I'm excited about that beyond just the COVID cases.
So let's just have you treat us like you're our lawyer here for the final 3 minutes of this interview. All right. How would you advise a veteran in our audience right now to go forth if they haven't begun the process of being restored yet, number one, and then number two, if they have, but they don't like where it's headed or they feel stymied or they're concerned? What would you advise in both cases?
I think we have to flood the Board of Corrections with requests for full restoration. So I think that's what we have to do. Just like we did during COVID, where we pushed back and it was numbers that were valuable, that's what I'd like to see. I would like to see as many people as possible filing requests for reinstatement and full restoration, even if you're still in and you were punished, you weren't promoted or otherwise, and flood the Board of Corrections with these cases so that Secretary Hegseth has a full, accurate picture of everything that happened to all of us and how big the problem is, because once he has that picture, then I think he and the Trump administration can move forward with fixing it.
I also think just looking at this the way you do military, I do civilians. Okay. So these guys are facing so many different fronts of pushback and obstinance about any reform on any level at all from the bureaucracy, the political bureaucracy of that department there. And you need to do what Davis just said, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, because there's only 24 hours a day. They're human beings. And the ones that seem to be the most chronic or acute cases of abuse are going to get their attention, because there's a lot of different fronts, I would imagine, that Pete Hegseth could spend 46 hours a day fighting this level of bureaucracy if he had to.
No, you're absolutely right. And the more cases we get in front, I mean, this could be There's 8,600 that were involuntarily separated. There's another 95,000 that were forced out of the military because of the COVID mandates. And so those numbers are critical. And again, we can't just give up now. I think we have to put the pressure on the system. You can apply. It doesn't mean you have to agree to go back in and serve. But the more folks that apply, the more pressure we put on the system, we reveal the problem, and they're not going to be able to hide it or continually bury these cases or keep them from Secretary Hegseth or the president.
All right, final thing, Davis. I don't want to, overload you with work, but do you guys have a resource or something? Because you obviously cannot represent all of those people, and there's not a lot of people working in your space. Do you have a resource or something available that people that are in any of those two camps you just mentioned could follow, look to, read, etc., just to help guide them through this process?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone can follow me on X. It's just at Davis Younts. You can reach out to my website. And then also we are still working with Stand With Warriors. StandWithWarriors.org was the organization that was started by pastors during COVID. And Stand With Warriors is getting ready for this fight as well. So they are gearing up resources. Michael Cassidy is going to be involved. He's the guy that tore down the Satan statue. He's going to be involved with Stand With Warriors on a more regular basis as well. So we're going to continue to push on that front. So StandWithWarriors.org. Stay tuned there for additional information and resources.
All right. Thank you, Davis. And again, you guys need more help. Rocket fuel in this. Don't hesitate to look us up and to ping us, okay?
All right. Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
You bet. Appreciate you. Thank you. What do you guys think?
There's a real potential silver lining into what I hope is the temporary problem that Davis is dealing with, is that it will out nefarious actors, both in terms of personnel and process, the kind of people and the kind of bureaucratic sludge that is designed not to get anywhere, whether we're talking about this vaccine issue or anything else. So because, like you said, there's only so many hours in a day, okay, this is what we're going to do here. March. Mm-hmm. You're going to find those who are like, okay, even if they're like, I'm just marching because I'm marching, I'll follow whatever as you tell me. Or they're the ones who are like, no, I'm totally part of the cult. I'm going to resist this as long as... It's going to be good to know that through this. It's going to be messy. There's no way around that.
Yeah, I think a similar dynamic needs to happen here, is what you were articulating in the first hour, Todd. So yeah, we have this giant retconning about who the COVID not vaccines should have been targeted towards. But what we really need to break through is this still very overt, really on the surface notion, hey, it saved millions upon millions, the magical power of vaccines. That needs to be broken through. And a similar dynamic needs to happen here in the military, where they're really starting at the top with the leadership. Who was in on this? Who knew, at least on some level, what this mandate was trying to accomplish? Out those people and hopefully excise them as well.
Well said, both of you. All right, we'll come back. Idolatry or not, what is the line between introducing people to something that could cause them to go astray and then warning them about that very same thing at the same time? We'll get into that in Pop Culture Tuesday next. All right, back here with Hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast with Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. I'm Steve Deace, and you can let us know who you are by letting us also know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can do so, Steve at stevedeace.com, DEACE. That's how you can email us, Steve at stevedeace.com. That's how you can email the show. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me as well at Steve Deace Show on X, Getter. No, I gave up on Getter. X, Instagram, and TikTok. I just get tired of posting there. No one else was there. Nothing was happening. Just one less thing for me to do. X, Instagram, and TikTok. I think, and that was evidently the right decision. One person in like 8 months since I last posted there has, hey, why aren't you posting on Getter? So you were the guy. All right. So X, Instagram, and TikTok. And then you can, is Steve Deace Show. And then you can subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel as well. We got rookie numbers there. We got to get those up. All right. Because we had to start all over We had good subscription numbers on our old YouTube page, just no viewer numbers, right?
And, I mean, we're doing okay, but we still need to up those numbers. By the way, if you ever want to share the montage, that's my New Year's resolution, posting that every day on YouTube as well.
Thank you for that reminder. And just to put it into context, like when we were talking a couple weeks ago about USAID and censorship by government on one end and then favoring of regime-approved narrative media on the other, what does that look like? Here's what it looks like. We on a daily basis are getting as many, if not more, views on a YouTube channel that has 11,000 plus subscribers as we were getting last year, in the last couple of years, on a page that had 5 or 6 times that many subscribers. That just should not happen. That math doesn't work, which means you'd have to put that's thumb on your scale. That's thumb on the scale math. You'd have to make that math happen. It wouldn't naturally happen. You wouldn't have 5, 6 times more people accessing your page and getting the same views as you would by 5, 6 times fewer people doing it, right? So we have to start all over again on YouTube. Please subscribe at Deace Show on YouTube. It really helps us. And thank you if you have, at Deace Show on YouTube. And then also, if you love the podcast, thank you. Please show your love for us by leaving us a 5-star review. We appreciate it if you've already done that too. You can also hit subscribe, or if you're on iTunes, hit follow. And that means every time that we do a new podcast, it shows there in your feed every single time. So thank you for that as well. And thank you to our friends over at Patriot Mobile. They have been among the leaders in helping to establish a parallel economy. It's impossible to not do business on some level in America with something or somebody who hates your guts, right? Thankfully, one place, though, where it is with your mobile phone, one product we all need in this day and age. And that someone is America's only American mobile phone company, our friends over at Patriot Mobile. They provide all the same exceptional service, all the same great coverage you get from the companies that hate you, but you don't have to pay them anymore. And they give, actually, unlike those companies, they give you a customer service team that is American, so you can actually understand them. All right. So if you want to take advantage and make that switch today, like our family finally did a few years ago, and we have never looked back, get a free month of service to get you started with the promo code Steve. That's a free month of service to get you started with the promo code Steve. When you go to patriotmobile.com/Steve. Again, that's patriotmobile.com/Steve. Once again, promo code Steve to get started with a free month of service at patriotmobile.com/Steve. All right, as we dig into idolatry or not, I want to actually go back into history because there has never been anything new under the sun. There's just new people under the sun who have yet to see something yet. And you've heard me say over the years, the devil has a greatest hits album. Just kind of re-racks things for new eras and new generations. In the 19th century, a book was published called The Origin of Species, or The Struggle for Survival of Favored Races. Now, that subtitle there, you probably haven't heard that one a lot because it's kind of politically incorrect and kind of impolite. So they kind of just retconned that whole thing and just went with Origin of Species. And that book was published in 1859. And you can literally trace the decline of what we now know as Western civilization to the publishing of that book. It's a line of demarcation. Except that book isn't really the problem. That book is just scientific inquiry. Many of the questions that it asks were based off of Darwin's understanding of a nascent science at the time known as geology, much of which we now know way more about than we did at the time. In fact, you don't even find a lot of major scientists today that are Christians. You also don't find a lot of them, by the way, that are Darwinists. They might believe in some aspects of his theories of evolution and not others, but you won't find a lot of hardcore committed Darwinists in many of your scientific academies or enclaves anymore. There have been just too many things have come about to question some of what he posited. And scientific inquiry moves on and continues. But it always starts with, we're just asking questions here. We're just asking questions. It always starts like that. Because here's the thing. Questions inevitably will always require what? Answers. They will always require answers. And the great thing about questions, when they're framed without the answer, is you get to kind of project your own biases and prejudices and desires and narratives and preferences upon what the answer could be. And then it kind of becomes like this cornucopia, this kind of ad hoc goulash. Well, you know, I mean, I can be a Christian Darwinist, and I can be an atheist Darwinist, and I can be a theonomical Darwinist, and I can do this and I can do that. But sooner or later, we have to have answers to questions once they're posited, real answers. And a lot of times, it's the same enterprise or being that was just asking questions that looks forward to being the one to also give you the answers. Because it was Darwin's next book, actually, that was the real problem. It was called The Descent of Man. That whole subtitle again that they've kind of just kicked to the curb because it sounds really eugenicist. And you know why? Because it was. That's why. All right. Sounds kind of racist. Yeah. Yeah, it was. And Darwin will spell all of this out in The Descent of Man. And he'll reveal that in the end, he wasn't interested in science. He was interested in a philosophy. Darwin himself said that Christianity had to be rejected because otherwise he has loved ones he cares greatly about that are in hell as we speak. Now, it may be true that Christianity has to be rejected, but nothing should ever be rejected on the basis of your difficulty in believing it. Can I get an amen on that?
Yeah.
If we're going to just start rejecting things on the difficulty of your ability to comprehend or believe it, well, then we're right back to what I like to say these days, which is someone will always rule and something must always be worshipped, right? I mean, if we're determining if something is true on the basis of whether you can tolerate it or accept it, then we are essentially saying that you are what? God.
Why do you think I talk so much all the time about why we're way too comfortable for everything you're talking about right now? Can
you think of an ancient being whose first line of dialogue in the grand scheme of things known as history is literally "ye be like God"? This line or is that all brand new? No, nothing new? Yeah, we just established there's nothing new under the sun. In The Descent of Man, Darwin seeks to flesh out that subtitle that a lot of your Western pagan progressive elites really believe, but know that they can't possibly get you to subscribe to without looking like exactly what people like me say they are. Essentially, Yuval Harari, basically. Yuval Harari is the fulfillment of The Descent of Man. If you want to know where Yuval Harari, who is the sensei, the shaman of the World Economic Forum, if you want to know really the source of his worldview, just go read The Descent of Man. It's the source of it, 100%. He's the manifestation of it. And in The Descent of Man, our Darwin realizes and recognizes, well, now that I ask questions, I guess we need to start supplying answers. And a lot of modern utilitarian ethics that gave rise to people like Margaret Sanger and others all were greatly influenced by The Descent of Man. Because Darwin also recognized someone will always rule and something must always be worshipped. And this brings me to a topic I know I have fixated on a bit here in the last couple of years on this show. And we're going to talk about that angle of it too. But I remain greatly concerned about this because I see the same transition is happening on this issue. When I was a kid, UFOs were ominous things. People told horrible stories about abductions and what was done to them during these abductions. Horror movies were made about aliens. In fact, sometimes they were literally called Aliens. Sometimes just called the movie that. They just sometimes even called the movie that. It was considered a topic of scientific inquiry, questioning, but also one, are we sure we want to know the answers to this? But a transition has taken place in this last era, where now these are beings of deliverance. The movie Independence Day, when we were kids, had it backwards. The movie starts with the stupid woman at the top of the roof and the group of young people that are out there dancing, welcoming the aliens and their deliverance, right? Higher consciousness, and the aliens respond. You guys remember how the aliens respond in the film?
They nuked her.
They absolutely just nuked them right where they stood, okay? We've reversed this now. We've gone from believing the aliens are here to nuke us if they exist at all. We've reversed it now. Now we are on the roof now, positive that they are here only for our own deliverance. And I continue to see lots of news, and Newsmax in particular. There is not an outlet on the American right that is giving more oxygen to this issue than Newsmax is. So Chris Ruddy, the guy who's still running Newsmax over there, I don't know what supposedly, I don't know Chris at all. He's supposed to be a devout Catholic. He has this clearly is there's some level of obsession that Chris Ruddy and Newsmax has in particular about feeding this issue. Stephen Greer's been on their channel a half dozen times just this year alone, it seems. Or at least that's how many clips I've seen. They seem to have a singular fixation as a channel and focusing on these issues above just about any other credible channel on the right that I have seen or outlet. And notice the conversations now are all different. We're not the X-Files anymore where the cigarette-smoking man is betraying humanity on behalf of a malevolent alien race. These are beings of deliverance now. Seeing something trending in my feed yesterday, I listened to 2 episodes of a very well-known UFO podcast. I'm not going to name it. And in the course of this podcast, I just picked the 2 episodes I thought were the most interesting. A Q&A, because it says in the description that they specifically want to talk about links between the occult and UFOs. And whether they should be linked. And I listened to this entire presentation, and the answer was yes. They even mocked at this conference. Can you guys believe there are government officials who think that these entities these non-human intelligences are actually demons? And they're here to deceive us? They laughed. They mocked. Everything, it's funny. When you're so open-minded that your brains fall out, everything can be considered as a possibility except a biblical worldview. You ever notice that?
All the time.
Everything's on the table except the biblical worldview is. So they thought the beings could very well just be extraterrestrial intelligence that is benevolent or malevolent, or neither one, just observatory. The occult was on the table. We need to achieve higher consciousness to communicate. Literally everything you could imagine was on the table. The one thing, though, while claiming, of course, they're very open-minded, the one thing that could not be entertained and was mocked, scorned, and ridiculed was that these beings are spiritual in nature from another realm and demons. They're objects of deception. That could not be entertained, but everything else could be. I then skipped ahead and listened to the last episode of this podcast. Except you find out when you start listening to it, it's not its last episode. It's going to rebrand. And it openly began branding itself as chasing the UFO rabbit hole. I'm just asking questions. I'm just following the evidence, and I just want to know. And now it's rebranding as a cosmology podcast. Because now it's not a search for answers, it's a search for meaning. Meaning. Several times the hostess of this podcast says, this caused my worldview to change. Why would your worldview change over something that never has not been proven or confirmed? That would require faith. Faith. It would require faith. It would require faith. I want to show you guys something. Aaron, can you put this graphic up for us? Thank you, brother. So this is an advertisement, and you might recognize the picture there in the top right. Thank you for zooming in. That's Ross Coulthart. That name sound familiar to our audience? I know it sounds familiar to you guys, right?
Yeah, my heart broke when I saw it. I said, oh.
You did. Actually, it was literally your email. Yes. Oh, no, it was, oh, God, please, no. That's what you wrote back to me. Yes. We spent an entire hour with old Ross 2 weeks ago, in fact, as he was interviewing a military contractor who was given 4.5 hours to testify behind closed doors to the United States Senate on his experience with a non-human intelligence that was maternal, that was effeminate, that awakened something in him spiritually. And then he went to a place in California known as the Esalen Institute, and they were able to, quote unquote, summon, end quote, these entities. Well, this is what old Ross, the former head of CBS 60 Minutes in Australia, hardcore religionist. Remember in that interview, Ross kept saying, I saw it too. And it was profound. Remember that? He was an advocate. He was literally an evangelist for this. Not a reporter, but an evangelist. Well, look at this now. Ross was advertising this just yesterday. I saw this. The transcendence of consciousness, mysteries of the megalith masters. You guys know what megaliths are? Now, if you're a boomer, you probably know them as monoliths. You know, like Arthur C. Clarke, 2001, 2010. The monolith that's found on the moon, and it's mysterious in origin. And then it shows up a decade later on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. And then thousands upon thousands of monoliths enter into the atmosphere of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, and transform it. We watch creation take place, transform it into a human habitable planet. A twin planet in our solar system for the Earth. Megaliths are perhaps what Arthur C. Clarke largely based these on. He called them monoliths. But these monoliths or megaliths, in many cases, are among the oldest religious relics we have found on planet Earth. We have numerous that go back to a period of time known as the antediluvian era. What is that? The most ancient of ancient times. We're talking pre-Noahic flood. Pre-Noahic flood. Therefore, what we're essentially seeing here are the first forms of demonic false religion, fake gods. Or what Eric von Däniken wrote in the 1960s were the chariots of the gods, that was the second highest best-selling nonfiction book of the 1970s was Eric von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. Number one was Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth about premillennial dispensational biblical eschatology. Number two, Eric von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. Chariots of the Gods was written in the 60s by a guy who was a French waiter. Eric von Däniken, French waiter. Just did this all as a hobby. Heavily influenced guys like Gene Roddenberry. In the movie Expelled, when Ben Stein keeps asking Richard Dawkins, well, how? Where did life come from? And he starts to say, well, crystal things were planted. I mean, that's right out of Chariots of the Gods. That's how Gene Roddenberry explained that every alien life form in Star Trek was humanoid. There was some master race that seeded all of the Class M or hospitable planets with their DNA. That's why they all have humanoid forms. That's Ridley Scott in the Alien franchise. He borrowed from that as well. Because in the end, there has to be a creation myth because someone will always rule and something must always be worshipped every time. There's only one reason why someone who thinks they're just asking questions about whether futuristic civilizations beyond the stars are visiting us and then turning right around and doing a, quote, transcendence of consciousness conference in Central America. There's only one reason why. They're not just doing scientific inquiry, but they're preaching a religion. And frankly, the second oldest religion in the history of this world. And the very first false one. And I'm telling you, I'm very concerned about this. Especially when I see channels like Newsmax giving a lot of audience to this. You can take that down, Aaron, if you want. So this brings me to the other part of this conversation. And we were having this privately within the last week here amongst the three of us, so we're going to let you guys in on it. What is the line between warning people about something and introducing them to it at the exact same time? Now, I tend to think, given who I think you guys are in our audience, that I'm way more concerned about warning you about things than introducing them to you, because I think you're probably a lot less gullible than a lot of other audiences in America are, just by virtue of hanging out with us on a consistent basis. However, I'm also open to the fact that that is my own rationalization, because in my antediluvian era, okay, before I became a Christian, I was obsessed with topics like this and the Loch Ness Monster and all these kinds of mysteries and Bermuda Triangles. So are there some residual tentacles of this where I'm concerned, or am I maybe, because I've fallen into these traps in my former life, maybe I'm too fixated on them when they're really not as much of a concern as I happen to think they are. But to me, I think we're seeing the exact pattern we saw with Darwinism, which is we start with what pretends to be scientific inquiry. We then sooner or later replace it with an entirely different ethos. And before you know it, Western civilization, as it was once known, is all but gone. I'm watching the same playbook play out here with this stuff. So Todd and Aaron, I turn it over to you now. What do you think?
Well, I'm left a little jealous, just I wish Christians would care as much, quite frankly, as a lot of the believers of whatever this is. So there's that. But secondly, yeah, we did have this conversation. I don't come from that background. I mean, I was a American boy who grew up in the 80s like Steve, so UFO movies or something like that, that's interesting. But I have no latent, hardcore interest in it like Steve does. So that's because Steve does, he may have antenna to see certain things that I don't. The flip side of that is maybe overly sensitive to things, as he said. Here's what I'm seeing with this kind of stuff. I don't see anything qualitatively or quantitatively that has taken this to a level of new critical mass that is different from the past. Although I'm sensitive to what you're saying, there's a transition here. Like, Steve, our entire adult life, there's been Art Bell and the guy who preceded him. What was that dude's name? Or was it the guy?
It was George Norrie.
George Norrie.
And Art Bell preceded Norrie.
Yes. Yeah. Those guys. This world has always been a mixture of what you're talking about on any given day. Sci-fi, UFO stuff, and kind of new age meaning sort of stuff. So Newsmax, I don't follow it, so I didn't see it. I'm not familiar with Chris Ruddy, so I don't know if he's Catholic or otherwise. I trust you on that. And which is why we had the conversation, because it came up with, there was some, I don't even remember what it was, but a possible follow-up to this the next day. And we talked about whether the very thing you talked about, is it worth, is it reached enough of a critical mass that people need to hear this again? I for my part, which is why I semi-jokingly say, oh dear God, no, because I think that we're erring more on the side of going danger Will Robinson when, quite frankly, this is just the same kind of neurotic crackpots that have always existed. And quite frankly, there's a lot more potent cults that are affecting the average American man than this one. And I hit on them, quite frankly, all the time.
So what was interesting is what spawned this conversation. You were just kind of live texting us a conversation on a different podcast, different format, what have you. And so Todd and I started watching the same thing that you were. And there was one point in the podcast, it wasn't like jumping the shark. It wasn't something that I just found deeply offensive necessarily, but there was one juncture where it was like, I've seen enough.
Yep.
There's nothing profitable for me as a believer to continue consuming this. And I had no idea that when I came in the next morning, Todd and I started talking about this. Todd had turned it off and had the exact same reaction. Again, it wasn't a super offensive, would you say, Todd?
No,
it was, we turned it off at pretty much the same time and had the exact same reaction. There's nothing profitable to me on an intellectual or spiritual level to continue to consuming this content. That's when I thought, oh boy, when I realized that Todd and I had the exact same reaction at the exact same juncture of this show that we were watching. That's when I thought, maybe we have crossed into the line, if we discussed this particular one on the show, maybe we've crossed into the line of introducing things to people that we ought not do. So overall, I don't mind having just you want to go back to show us the bodies? I think that's a fine rubric for this. Because on the one hand, we are simultaneously taking seriously enough, not too seriously, the nature of what I think we're really talking about here, which is what you just laid out, which is really prehistoric demonism. Okay, we are identifying that. We are giving enough respect, a la C.S. Lewis's words at the beginning of Screw Tape Letters, which is, you fall into one of two ditches. You either are obsessed with this stuff or don't take it seriously
enough. The magician and the materialist.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm fine with just keeping it a show policy, show us the bodies. And from time to time, if we need to have conversations like this, that's fine. But getting into the specifics of this, because I can see how, and I'm not saying that is our audience. Our audience is amazing. And as you said, I just want to reiterate that as well. Probably the more discerning type. So I'm not saying that to this audience, but if there's a broader audience out there, I can see how some of this content is, are we really sure that these orbs, that these beings that just seemingly talk to people and tell them sweet nothings, are we really sure that these are the baddies? That's what I'm concerned about.
Fair. So moving forward, folks, if you encounter this stuff on your social media feeds with friends, family, start asking the single question: where are the bodies? Where are the pilots? Why do we have all these great images of these aerial phenomenon and nothing of the beings actually piloting them? Who's piloting them? And where are the images of them? More in a moment. Well, it is possible that we might even be able to have a real estate market again. I mean, forget making real estate great again. We might actually have a real estate market again. We have not had one of those in the last few years. Between COVID and Let's Go Brandon, there hasn't been much of a real estate market, right? And we may get it back, which means in these unprecedented times,
Bing.
You need to make sure, if indeed we are going to bring back the real estate market, we got to bring back real estate agents you can trust to guide you through such unprecedented times. Where would you find such an agent? Just go to the website. realestateagentsitrust.com is where you can go. That's realestateagentsitrust.com to get hooked up with an agent that a lot of times comes from this very audience. So they share the same values as you, but then also an agent that has a proven track record of success, which is why we recommend them to you, to help you get, whether it is across the state, across the country, ultimately across the finish line with the right result for you and your family. realestateagentsitrust.com is where you want to go. Again, head over there today to realestateagentsitrust.com. And also don't forget that out right now as well is the latest installment of The Cover-Up, the outstanding Blaze Originals Files series here by Matt Kibbe, looking at what's been going on with COVID and Dr. Fauci. This latest chapter includes Dr. Richard Ebright, very renowned molecular biologist at Rutgers University, among the very first scientists to raise concerns about gain-of-function research and help to successfully lobby the Obama administration into getting rid of it, at least temporarily. He is with Matt Kibbe on this latest episode as he walks through how gain-of-function research and connecting dots and tracing the funding has led to much of what we experienced during COVID. So you want to get this latest episode, The Cover-Up, Smoking Gun. It's on Blaze TV right now. You can become a subscriber if you're not one already at FauciCoverup.com/Deace. That's FauciCoverup.com/Deace. Use the code Smoking Gun to get $30 off of your subscription if you're not a subscriber yet. All right, $30 off your Blaze TV subscription to watch this with the code Smoking Gun when you go to FauciCoverup.com/Deace. Again, that's FauciCoverup.com/Deace. And we will go now to Pop Culture Tuesday. And this is where we take a look each week at what's trending in popular culture along with what we're trying to actually conserve in the culture. And this week we're going to talk about what's the number one movie right now in the country, Captain America: Brave New World. It had an okay opening. You and I were talking about this yesterday off the air. I did go look. The numbers look big, but it actually opened worse than Ant-Man Quantumania did a few years ago, which also opened over President's Day weekend. So that was also a film that had a long weekend opening too. And it opened, I want to say, $15-20 million worse than Ant-Man Quantumania did. And that was looked at that movie was looked at as a failure by Marvel. So I will find out how it goes this week with week 2, because week 2 is when word of mouth gets out, right? There can be huge hype and great marketing, particularly if you're dealing with a powerful brand like Marvel still is. All right. Week 2, especially this time of year, like when it's really cold or really hot, people are looking for a reason. If it's really hot, to go do something indoors. If it's really cold, get the hell out of the house and do something in a place that's warm. Okay. And so now that the word of mouth is out and it has the lowest cinema score of any film Marvel has made, which I don't think it deserves that. It's not as bad as Eternals was, for example, or Thor: Love and Thunder, which isn't a movie as much as an abomination. I couldn't even bring myself to watch the Marvels. All right. So it's not in that class of deplorable. But it is the lowest cinema score movie, and that usually indicates poor word of mouth. So let's see how big the drop off here is for week 2. But I want to talk about the worldview of the film, but probably not in the way you might think. Okay, and it was really weird too, because, and we talked about this at the time, guys, the comments that Anthony Mackie, who has been, very likable as the character of the Falcon in the several years he's been playing it, going back to Captain America: Winter Soldier. And the comments that he made on a given day, and sometimes in the same soundbite, depending on where you stop the edit, would really upset them or would really upset us. Like, it was actually in the exact same soundbite. Then Anthony Mackie said, my favorite superheroes growing up were the Incredible Hulk, who's green, and Superman, who was white. Color didn't matter to me. Heroism doesn't know a color. It doesn't really matter. Now, that's the kind of stuff Joy Reid is, she's cutting herself seeing a black actor say stuff like that, right? And then 5 minutes later, many of us wanted to cut him, okay? And in the exact same soundbite, he says, well, I kind of think there's, everything important about Captain America is what he stands for, and it doesn't, it's not really American, except his name is literally Captain America. That's literally his name. It's not Captain Universal Values. It's literally Captain America. It's the name of the character you're playing. What his name is. His name is America. So, yeah. Anyway. The film doesn't have a worldview. If there was a way to make a movie that was like a rubbing alcohol swab, there's no taste. There's no texture. It has nothing to say. they made it. Somehow they made a movie where there's almost a World War III. One of the main characters is played by Harrison Ford as the President of the United States. And the president's private security team is overseen by an Israeli woman. And yet somehow it literally has nothing to say. I mean, it doesn't say anything. It has nothing to say. Nothing. If the special effects weren't on point, you would feel like you were watching like a TV movie of the week from when we were kids. It just doesn't say anything. The whole thing's empty calories. Except when you watch the film, you can tell there were several moments that they were going to say some things. Just the way the film is edited. Then you go and you read, they did a whole bunch of reshoots. Now, most Marvel movies do reshoots, okay? Marvel does that as an insurance policy. They film a movie, they screen it. Maybe there's some things about it we don't like. And so they try to change those things. So when the film comes out, it's better than what they thought they had. So when we were kids growing up, reshoots meant a movie was usually going to suck. That's not necessarily what it means nowadays. And this movie does not suck. I mean, it's edited well. It has some okay action sequences that are worthwhile. The first basic test any movie in our family has to pass is will my wife stay awake throughout all of it. I've threatened Amy for years that we're going to do a segment with her, Amy's narcoleptic movie reviews. And instead of thumbs up, okay, or like Siskel and Ebert, it was just, Siskel and Ebert.
Consciousness.
Yes. Siskel and Ebert didn't give out stars, just a thumbs up or down. That's all they did, okay? With Amy, could you keep Amy's attention? Could you keep her awake or not? That's the singular grade. Did Amy stay awake? And she did. She was awake the whole time. And she didn't see the Falcon and the Winter Soldier Marvel show that this is kind of a sequel to. She did not. She felt like she was asleep throughout much of the Eternals. I wish I would have been. So this movie is kind of a sequel to that. So there's a lot of exposition here that you won't get if you didn't see that movie or watch that series. Okay. But the movie has nothing to say. And it's very clear that this is on purpose. And the movie follows the exact same formula as The Winter Soldier. All right. Even to the point of let's go get an all-time A-list actor at the end of his career that we can afford now and is willing to do a comic book movie and make him, the titular political figure in the film. They did that with Robert Redford as the head of Hydra. Well, he ends up being revealed as that, but they don't think that at first, right? So they did that with Robert Redford in The Winter Soldier, which is arguably the best movie that the MCU ever produced. It's at least in the top 3. And they do that same thing with Harrison Ford. So they're following the formula here. There's an internal conspiracy, okay? Who's pulling the strings? What's really going on? Even like in The Winter Soldier, where they go down and they find Captain America and Black Widow find the lab that's been tucked away and what's really been going on there, right? Okay. And the same thing happens in this film. They follow this formula almost exactly. But unlike Winter Soldier, which did a great job of maturely demonstrating the argument at the time between security and liberty, and Nick Fury's basically the Dick Cheney wing. Hey, we go at any threat, we go balls to the wall and we're ready to go. War, perpetual war if we have to. Perpetual war machine if needed. And Captain America is basically your Robert F. Kennedy, Rand Pauler, okay? Liberty has to come first, and who watches the watchers, right? And they have this running dialogue all throughout the film, and it makes for quality subtext. It's a great film. It's pretty obvious at this point that Disney does not believe it's capable of making that kind of a film, because they could have done that here. They could have done something similar here. But it's very clear that either they didn't believe that they were capable of doing that in a way that did not turn Harrison Ford's president into some shoehorn, ham-fisted takeoff of Trump that would alienate vast swaths of its intended audience, or they didn't trust that you plebes would be willing to, wouldn't be capable of receiving it as such, even if they tried. So in that case, the movie literally says nothing. We even go to war with Japan instead of China so that the movie can open in China, because if we had gone to war with China, China wouldn't take it. that Israeli character, she's actually based on the Captain Israel, essentially, is what she essentially is in the comic books. She is a mutant that's a former Mossad agent turned superhero. Well, they had to rewrite her character, too, after October 7th, because it might offend the Muslim world if we had a former member of Mossad whose suit has a Star of David on it as one of the heroes of the movie. So that had to be... The amount of political posturing and pressuring... I just figured it out. This is like if Mitch McConnell made a superhero movie. Or if Mitt Romney made a superhero movie. How do we stand for nothing and offend no one? How do we just make a movie that's largely a well-funded empty suit? How do we do it? Make it as banal and vapid as we possibly can, risk offending absolutely nobody, and just strip it of any local color whatsoever, any soul at all. How do we make a soulless technocratic film? That's what it is. It literally says nothing, and it's on purpose. Todd, I can see you chomping at the bit, so I yield the balance of my time.
Well, I learned nothing from that because I've believed that about this franchise for a long time. I am shake the dust from your feet. Steve, you have the right analysis, and I think you should apply it to this, and many of you folks should as well. When we were talking a week ago, and you rightly said, when we were talking with Alvin Louis of Courage is a Habit about Maine and what's going on there, and I think we should just let them have what they want, right? Just let them choke on it. We should do this as well. We should stop. What do we expect from this franchise now after Endgame, which was pre-COVID? We've had a big sample now, 5 years of garbage, most of which I haven't seen. Why are we going to these movies? They're not good. They don't want to be good. They have no intention of being good. They were good in the past. Go put them on your, like Aaron is, pull those back up. But this is, what do we expect? We should have a similar standard to this as we do other things. Stop going to see them. Make them pay.
Bella and I, as you just alluded to, Todd, just started watching the original Infinity Saga. So that's phases 1 through 3 or 4. 1 through 3, I think it is, or maybe it's 1 through 4. Can't remember. And so we started, of course, with Captain America. We're watching them in chronological order, not the order they were released in. So we started with Captain America, the first Avenger. And we just started the first Avengers movie the other night. And hearing your review of this latest iteration of Captain America, particularly against the juxtaposition and backdrop of having fresh in my mind the first few forays into the last very successful Avengers saga, it really does underscore how quickly any institution, and make no mistake, the Marvel Cinematic Universe for about a decade and a half was an institution in this country. How quickly institutions can go down the tubes. I think it was the very first MCU movie, wasn't it? Iron Man back in 2008? Was that the first foray into this? It is incredible knowing how Tony Stark's character arc ends up and everything that happens in the intervening period in those 20-some-odd movies before Avengers Endgame, how that was still driven home. Does Tony Stark have a heart? Does he? Can he be selfless? These timeless themes, starting, of course, with Captain America, and that's re-articulated in the first Avengers movie, which we have not finished yet. Those are what really made those movies tick. Not the great graphics. Those are really cool. Not the great fight sequences. There were some great ones. Not the intricate level of story, storytelling, it's very formulaic. There's a lot of formulas, but it's very formulaic. It wasn't just the story itself. It was tapping into these timeless themes. It wasn't just it wasn't just the format of the story that made it so great. They have to get back to that, and I don't know if they're capable in the year 2025, even in the way they were in the year 2008. 17 years, folks. 17 years. And this is how far they have fallen.
Or as Steve said yesterday, one generation.
Yes, exactly. A half a generation in this case.
Yeah.
They may not be. I mean, they're trying to reboot Star Wars yet again, figure out the formula yet again.
Didn't they just delay the whole Daisy Ridley?
Yeah, now there's talk that that's going to start filming later this year now. Yeah.
Pay them the favor of respecting like the man you used to be. Make
one of the
this
great
modern,
lines of Man of Steel.
Destroy this version. I'm telling you. I know you loved it. That nostalgia's killing you. If you really want to bring it back, maybe for your kids and your grandkids, help kill it now.
All this just makes me really. By the way, I used to think that you could not make a movie that without putting Philip Seymour Hoffman in it before he died. Are we able to produce anything that Pedro Pascal is not in? Do you know why suddenly Pedro Pascal and Snoop Dogg are literally omnipresent everywhere you turn? There's Snoop Dogg and Pedro Pascal. Do you guys know why that is? I mean, I think Pedro Pascal's fine.
He's making up for all that time he had to hide behind Boba Fett's mask, I guess.
But all this makes me really fascinated with what James Gunn is going to come up with Superman. It does. It really does. It does. I am uniquely fascinated. Okay, because he has demonstrated in all of his pre-release commentary, he is very aware of these tensions in the culture. He's very aware of them. So is he able to understand them, or does he also just make an antiseptic Superman that's just a husk, for fear of offending anybody with having something to say, right? It'll be fascinating. That'll do it. We're going to stick around and do overtime for subscribers. For the rest of you, Romans 8:28. See you tomorrow.